We watched her take her first steps on this show. We watched her grow from a giggling toddler into a little girl. All of it on camera. All of it part of the family we tuned in for. And now, Truly Brown is 14 years old, and her life looks almost nothing like the one we first met her in. The chaos of a sprawling plural family has been replaced by something quieter and, by every appearance, much steadier. A regular school, a stable home, a mom and a stepdad. A childhood that finally looks, well, normal. So tonight, I want to do something a little gentler than usual. I want to talk about where Truly is now, how she got the calm she has today, and what her story quietly tells us about the family she was born into. And I want to do it with care, because she's still a kid, and she deserves that. Let me set the scene for where Truly's life actually is in 2026. She's living in Utah with her mother Christine and Christine's husband David. She's going to a regular school. She's growing up largely out of the relentless spotlight that defined her early years. And that, right there, is a bigger deal than it might sound. Because for most of Truly's childhood, her life wasn't private at all. It was content. Her family's tensions, her parents' struggles, the dissolution of the only family structure she'd ever known, all of it unfolded in front of millions of strangers. So for her to now have something resembling an ordinary teenage life, with the privacy and stability that most kids take for granted, represents an enormous shift. She went from being a character to being simply a kid. To understand how meaningful that calm is, you have to remember where she started. Truly was born into the Brown family at a time of real complexity. She was Christine's youngest, the baby of that household, growing up inside a family that was, even then, carrying tensions beneath the surface. And as she grew, those tensions only intensified. She was still a child when her mother, Christine, made the decision that changed everything. The decision to leave Kody and the plural family behind. Imagine being a young girl and watching your family, the only structure you've ever known, come apart. That's a lot for any child to absorb. And Truly absorbed it during some of the most formative years of her life. But here's where the story turns hopeful, and it turns on Christine. When Christine left, she didn't just walk away from a marriage, she walked toward a different life. And she brought Truly with her into something better. Christine eventually married David, and by all accounts built a warm, stable home. And so Truly, instead of being defined by the breakup of her original family, got a second act. She got a household with less tension and more peace. She has a stepfather in the picture, and a mother who, by every visible sign, is happier than she'd been in years. The calm that Truly enjoys today isn't an accident. It's the direct result of a mother who chose to build something healthier and made sure her youngest came along into that healthier life. Now I want to address the more delicate part of this story, the legal piece. And I want to do it factually and without melodrama. In early 2025, the custody and paternity matters concerning Truly were settled through the courts. By the reporting, paternity was confirmed. Both parties were directed to complete certain steps, and Christine was granted primary custody of Truly. I'm stating that plainly because it's part of the public record, but I'm not going to sensationalize it. What it means in practical terms is straightforward. Truly's day-to-day life is centered in Christine's home, with Christine as her primary parent. And given how stable and happy that home appears to be, that outcome reads less like a battle and more like a confirmation of where Truly's life had already settled. And this is where Truly's story quietly says something about the larger family. Something we have to handle gently because it involves a child and her father. The reality is that, by the visible evidence, Truly's daily life doesn't appear to be closely centered around Kody. Her world is her mom, her stepdad, her school, her ordinary teenage routines. Now, I'm not going to speculate about the private details of a father-daughter relationship because that's genuinely not my place, and it's not fair to Truly. What I'll say is simply this. Truly seems to be thriving in a home built largely by her mother, and that observation fits the broader pattern we've seen across this whole family, where the children's stability tends to track most closely with their mothers. I'll leave the deeper interpretation to you, and I'll leave Truly her privacy. What I find genuinely beautiful about Truly's situation is that she's getting a chance that a lot of the older Brown kids never quite got the chance to be a normal teenager. Think about her older siblings and half-siblings, who spent their entire adolescence on camera, whose every awkward phase and family conflict was broadcast and dissected. Truly, by stepping back from the spotlight and into a regular school and a stable home, gets to do the ordinary work of growing up without an audience. She gets to have friends who know her as Truly, not as a character on a show. She gets to make mistakes and figure herself out in private, the way teenagers are supposed to. After a childhood with no privacy, that ordinariness is a genuine gift. I think there's something quietly powerful in the idea that the youngest child of this very public family might end up with the most private and most normal upbringing of all of them. It's almost as if the lessons of the older siblings' experiences, combined with Christine's decision to build a new life, gave Truly a softer landing than her brothers and sisters had. The baby of the family, who could have been the most caught up in the chaos, instead got pulled out of it earliest, while she was still young enough to have a real, stable adolescence on the other side. There's a kind of grace in that. The chaos that defined the family for so long doesn't get to define its youngest daughter's teenage years. And let me give Christine her due here, because Truly's stability is, in large part, Christine's achievement. It's one thing to leave a difficult situation for your own sake. It's another to leave it and successfully build a whole new, healthy home that gives your child a better life. Christine did both. She became the breakout success story of the entire franchise, not just because she found love again, but because she built something stable enough to raise her youngest in peace. When we talk about truly thriving, we're really talking about the fruit of choices Christine made, the courage to leave, the wisdom to rebuild, and the commitment to make sure her daughter landed somewhere good. Truly's calm is Christine's legacy in real time. Now, I want to be balanced because even a hopeful story deserves an honest look. Growing up is never perfectly smooth for anyone, and I'm not going to pretend Truly's life is some flawless fairy tale, because no teenager's life is, and it would be naive to suggest otherwise. Blended families have their own adjustments. Being the child of famous parents carries its own strange pressures, even when you step back from the cameras. And every kid, no matter how stable their home, has their own private struggles growing up. So I'm not claiming everything is perfect. What I'm pointing to is the trajectory, the overall shape of her circumstances. And that shape is markedly more stable, more peaceful, and more normal than the one she started in. That's the honest, measured read. There's a broader reflection in Truly's story that I think applies far beyond this one family. Kids are resilient, but they're not invincible. And what they need more than anything is stability, a calm home, a present parent, a sense that the ground beneath them isn't going to shift. For a long stretch of her early life, Truly didn't fully have that, through no fault of her own. And then her mother gave it to her. The single most important thing you can do for a child caught in family upheaval is to get them to solid ground. Christine did that. And the fact that Truly now gets to be an ordinary, reasonably happy teenager is the evidence that it worked. Stability isn't flashy. It doesn't make for dramatic television, but it's the thing that actually heals kids. So when I look at Truly Brown today, 14, in a regular school, living in a stable home with her mom and stepdad, out of the spotlight, getting to just be a teenager, I don't feel the urge to make it dramatic. I feel something more like relief. Relief that the baby of this complicated family found her way to calm waters. Relief that someone made sure she got a real childhood on the far side of all the upheaval. Of all the storylines in this family, the ones full of money disputes and broken friendships and lingering resentments, Truly's might be the most quietly satisfying, precisely because it's so undramatic. It's the story of a kid who's going to be okay. And honestly, after everything this family has been through, that's a story worth telling. Let me linger on what it actually means to grow up on camera, because Truly's whole early life was exactly that, and I don't think most of us fully appreciate how strange it is. From the time she was born, Truly's milestones weren't private family memories, they were episodes. Her first words, her birthdays, her family's arguments, her parents' eventual split, all of it was filmed, edited, broadcast, and discussed by strangers who felt like they had a stake in her life. Most kids get to grow up in the protective bubble of their own family's privacy. Truly grew up in a fishbowl. And so the most radical, healthiest thing that could happen to her was the thing that did happen. She got pulled out of the fishbowl and given the chance to just be a regular kid. That transition from public spectacle to private adolescence is genuinely one of the best things that could have happened to her. And a big part of that healthier chapter is the home Christine built with David. Christine married David Woolley in October of 2023, and by every public account, he's brought a warmth and steadiness into the household that's a world away from the tension of the past. Now, I want to be careful here, because praising a step-parent isn't about diminishing anyone. It's simply to observe that Truly is, by all appearances, growing up in a home with two adults who are happy together and who provide a calm, supportive environment. For a teenager, that atmosphere matters enormously. The emotional temperature of the house you grow up in shapes you, and the emotional temperature of Truly's house seems to have gone from strained to warm. That's a gift that will quietly pay dividends for the rest of her life. I think it's worth pausing on the contrast between Truly's adolescence and that of her older siblings, because it really highlights how different her path is. Many of the older Brown kids hit all their major teenage and young adult milestones: first relationships, graduations, weddings, even early struggles under the full glare of the cameras and the commentary of the internet. Every choice they made was content for someone else to consume. Truly, by stepping back, gets to experience those same milestones the way they're meant to be experienced privately, among people who actually know and love her, without an audience scoring her every move. She gets to have a first heartbreak that isn't a plot point. She gets to figure out who she is without millions of people offering opinions. That privacy is a luxury her older siblings never had, and it may be the single greatest advantage of her current life. There's actually a wider phenomenon here that Truly is part of, and it's something worth thinking about. We're living through the first generation of kids who grew up on reality television, and many of them, as they reach adulthood, are making a very deliberate choice to reclaim their privacy. They've lived the experiment of having no boundaries between their personal lives and public consumption, and a lot of them have decided they want no part of continuing it. Truly stepping into a normal, low-profile life fits that larger pattern perfectly. She's part of a generation quietly deciding that being known by strangers is not the same as being known by people who love you, and that the latter is worth infinitely more. In choosing the ordinary, she's choosing the thing that actually nourishes a person. And I'll be honest about something tender here, which is how it feels for the audience to watch a kid like Truly grow up. A lot of longtime viewers feel a real, if slightly strange, affection for these children, because we genuinely watched them grow. We remember Truly as a tiny child, so seeing her reach 14, healthy and stable, lands with a warmth that surprises people. There's a protective instinct that kicks in, and I think that protective instinct is exactly right. And it's exactly why channels like this one have a responsibility to talk about her with care, rather than turning her into clickbait. The same audience that watched her grow up should be the audience that roots for her privacy and her peace, not the audience that demands every detail of her teenage life. We can care about her by leaving her alone. Let me say a bit more about Christine's parenting, because I think it's the quiet engine of this entire happy story. Leaving a difficult marriage is hard. Leaving it with a young child and then making sure that child lands somewhere genuinely better is harder still. Christine had to make a series of brave and unglamorous choices to leave, to start over, to build a new relationship carefully, to prioritize stability for Truly through all of it. None of that makes for explosive television, but all of it is exactly what good parenting in a hard situation actually looks like. The flashy moments get the headlines, but the real work was in the quiet, daily commitment to giving Truly a steady foundation. And the proof of that work is a 14-year-old who, by every sign, is doing just fine. I want to reflect for a moment on how underrated normalcy is, because Truly's story is really a celebration of the ordinary. We live in a culture that prizes the dramatic, the exceptional, the spotlight. But ask anyone who had a chaotic childhood what they wished they'd had, and they won't say fame or excitement. They'll say stability, a calm house, a predictable routine, the boring, beautiful safety of knowing the people who are supposed to take care of you actually will. That's what Truly has now, and it's worth more than any storyline. The least dramatic life in this entire family might genuinely be the most fortunate one. And there's a lesson in that for all of us about what actually makes a childhood good. Not excitement, but security. The last thing I'll say before we wrap is this, and I say it with real tenderness. Truly didn't choose any of the circumstances of her early life. She didn't choose the cameras, the plural family, the tensions, or the eventual split. Those were all decisions made by adults around her. But the chapter she's in now is the stable home, the normal school, the privacy, the calm. That's the chapter where the adults around her finally got it right. Her mother built her a soft place to land, and whatever complexity remains in this family's larger story, the fact that its youngest daughter is growing up safe and steady is something everyone watching can feel genuinely good about. Some stories in this family are about loss. Truly's is about a kid who got a real shot at a happy, ordinary life. And that's the best ending any of us could hope for her. It's also worth remembering that Truly represents a kind of full-circle moment for longtime viewers of the show. She was one of the babies whose arrival we celebrated in the early seasons, back when the family still felt hopeful and whole. So, in a very real sense, her journey has bookended an entire era of this franchise. We met her at the beginning, when the dream still seemed intact, and now we find her on the other side of that dream's collapse. Not broken by it, but quietly thriving beyond it. There's a strange comfort in that symmetry. The family the show was built on came apart, but the little girl we watched grow up inside it came out the other side okay. If you're looking for a sign that something good survived all the upheaval, Truly is it. So let me turn it to you, and I'd love for the comments on this one to stay as warm as the story. Of all the Brown children, who do you think ended up with the most stable, healthiest landing? And does Truly make your list? And here's the question. I really want your thoughts on how important do you think it was that Christine pulled Truly into a new, stable home while she was still young? Do you think that early second chance made all the difference? Tell me in the comments, because I read every one, and conversations about the kids are always the most heartfelt. If you'd like me to do a gentle, respectful catch-up on how Christine's whole new chapter is going, the marriage, the home, the fresh start, let me know, and I'll make that one next. And if you appreciate that we cover the younger members of this family with genuine care, instead of turning them into clickbait, then do me a favor and subscribe, because kindness and honesty can absolutely coexist, and that's exactly what we aim for here.